Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. This is Emma, and I am so glad you could join me for what I promise will be a truly captivating and deeply moving story. Tonight, we are diving deep into a series of incredibly personal and chilling paranormal experiences from a young woman who has been followed by the supernatural for most of her life. Now, we often think that when our loved ones pass away, their immense love for us transforms into a protective force, that they become our guardian angels watching over us from a peaceful distance. But what if that love is so strong, so all-consuming, so possessive, that they don't want to just watch over you? What if they want you to join them? What if their love becomes a chain, trying to pull you from the light of the living into the shadows of their world? Today's story comes from a listener named Clara, who lives in a small town in Arkansas. She's been a follower of the channel since the very beginning and has decided, with great courage, to share the profound spiritual events that have shaped her life. Her first story is a heartbreaking and terrifying account of her paternal grandparents, and how their undying love for her very nearly pulled her into the grave. A grandparent's undying love. Clara tells me that from a very young age, her world was the world her grandparents built for her. She lived with them, Arthur and Eleanor, in the sleepy, sun-baked town of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. The air there hung heavy with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Her own parents, chasing a living, lived and worked in another town. So it was her grandparents who raised her, who tucked her in at night and kissed her scrapes better. As their only granddaughter, she was the absolute center of their universe, the sun around which their lives revolved. But she always shared a particularly special, unspoken bond with her Grandpa Arthur. Grandpa Arthur was a man of quiet, powerful contrasts. He was incredibly frugal, a man forged in leaner times who likely grew up with very little and had learned to pinch every single penny until it cried. Clara remembers him scolding Grandma Eleanor, his voice stern but not unkind, for buying something as simple as a watermelon, deeming it an unnecessary, frivolous expense. But that strict, ironclad frugality never, ever applied to Clara. From the moment she could form a word to ask for something, whatever she wanted, she got. Grandpa Arthur doted on her endlessly. His love was a tangible thing, a warm, protective blanket that shielded her from the world. It was so profound that even on his deathbed, his body failing him, his primary concern was ensuring her future was safe and secure. This unique bond manifested in a strange nightly ritual. Clara almost always chose to sleep in her grandfather's room. Grandma Eleanor, who loved her just as dearly, her heart aching for that same closeness, would often plead with her, her voice soft and hopeful. "Please, Clara, just one night. Come sleep with me tonight." Clara would sometimes agree, not wanting to hurt her feelings. But for some reason, she could never get a good night's rest in her grandmother's bed. She would toss and turn, the sheets feeling scratchy and foreign, her mind restless, until the first grey light of dawn crept into the room. Grandpa Arthur noticed this. He saw the tired circles under her eyes on those mornings. Eventually, with a quiet authority, he insisted she just sleep with him every night, in his presence, cocooned in the familiar scent of his Old Spice aftershave and the sound of his steady breathing. She slept soundly and peacefully. Though she was away from her parents, her life was filled to the brim with the immense, unconditional love of her grandparents. This idyllic, sun-drenched childhood, however, was shattered when Clara was in the 7th grade. The world tilted on its axis. Grandpa Arthur was diagnosed with liver cancer and he passed away not long after, the light in their home dimming to a flicker. But even in his final days, his mind clouded with pain. His focus remained sharp and clear on Clara. Before he died, he meticulously arranged his affairs, not for his own peace, but to provide for hers. He set aside a substantial sum of money, the equivalent of about $20,000 today, as a nest egg for her to start her adult life, a final gift from beyond the grave. In an era when personal computers were a significant, almost unimaginable luxury, he bought her a complete desktop setup, the humming tower, the heavy CRT monitor, the clacking keyboard, and even a brand new wooden desk to put it all on. He also bought her a shiny new bicycle for her to ride to school. At the time, Clara was too young to understand the full, profound significance of these gifts. She was just a child, happy to receive them. It was only years later, as an adult looking back, that she learned the staggering truth. She was the only grandchild, out of many, to receive anything from him. His final acts of generosity, the fruits of a lifetime of penny pinching, were reserved for her and her alone. A grandmother's heartbreak. The family home was a large, rambling, single-story house with a separate block of 8 small rental units on the same property. When Grandpa Arthur passed, his will divided the estate with a solemn precision. The main house was left to his 5th child, Clara's Aunt Carol. Her father was given the block of 8 rental units, along with a vacant plot of land behind it. A practical inheritance meant to provide his family with a steady income. However, there was a condition, a sacred pact, tied to Aunt Carol's inheritance because she received the main family home. It was her solemn duty and responsibility to care for Grandma Eleanor for the rest of her life. For the first couple of years, things were manageable. Grandma Eleanor, though grieving, was still healthy enough to move about the house and tend to small chores. But as time wore on, it took its cruel toll. She grew frail, her movements slow and uncertain, her mobility declining until she could barely walk on her own. It was then, when she was at her most vulnerable, that Aunt Carol's care turned into outright neglect and a quiet, daily cruelty. Every morning, when Aunt Carol left for work, she would lock Grandma Eleanor inside the house alone. She claimed it was for her own safety, to prevent burglars from getting in. But the effect was that her elderly mother became a prisoner in her own home, the home she had shared with her husband for decades. Clara reflects on this with a deep, lingering sorrow. We feel suffocated if the power goes out for just a few hours in the summer heat. She told me, her voice thick with emotion. My grandmother had to endure that every single day, for years. Locked in a silent, sweltering house with no television, no fan, nothing but the ghosts of her memories to keep her company. If Grandma Eleanor, her stomach racked with hunger, dared to take something from the refrigerator, Aunt Carol would return from work and berate her mercilessly, her voice a sharp, ugly weapon. At lunchtime, her own daughter would hastily scoop a bowl of rice and leftovers, hand it to her mother without a word of kindness, and order her to go eat alone in a corner while the rest of the family, her daughter, her son-in-law, her other grandchildren ate at the main table. As Eleanor's health worsened, she lost the ability to feed herself. Parkinson's took hold, and her trembling hands would cause her to spill food, which only enraged Aunt Carol further. Clara, who was still just a child, would witness her aunt screaming at her helpless, shaking grandmother. She tried to help whenever she could, rushing over after school to gently feed her grandmother, spoon by patient spoon, But Aunt Carol would often scold her too. "Stop babying her," she would snap, snatching the spoon away. "You need to let her feed herself. No one has time to spoon feed her all day." The worst, Clara remembers. The image burned into her memory forever was watching her aunt feed her mother. Aunt Carol would scoop up massive, heaping spoonfuls of food and shove them brutally into Eleanor's mouth, forcing her to swallow before she had even finished chewing. It was a brutal, dehumanizing spectacle, like watching one of those horrible, secret videos of caregivers abusing children. When Clara fed her, she would use a small spoon, waiting patiently, humming softly, for her grandmother to finish each bite. On the days Clara was there, a look of immense, profound relief would wash over Grandma Eleanor's face. Other relatives would visit and, seeing the situation, would press small amounts of money into Elena's hand. She would secretly pass every dollar to Clara, refusing to keep any for herself. Eventually, the other siblings saw the extent of the abuse and intervened. Clara's Aunt Susan, who lived only a mile away, offered to take her mother in. But the reprieve was heartbreakingly short-lived. Susan treated her mother not as family, but as an inconvenient, unpaid job. She would order Clara, who was now in the 9th grade, a child herself, to come over every single day to care for her own grandmother before school. At 6:30 inches the morning, Clara would feed her breakfast. She would rush back during her lunch break, her friends heading to the cafeteria while she spoon-fed her grandmother. In the evenings, she would often have to bathe her as well, her small hands struggling to support her grandmother's frail body. Clara vividly remembers one evening when her Uncle David offered her a banana. As she reached for it, he said, "Take one of the black, bruised ones first. We should save the good ones for us." In that small, thoughtless, cruel comment, Clara understood the cold, hard truth. Her grandparents, the people who had built this family, were not truly welcome there. They were an afterthought. Sure enough, after just 1 month, Aunt Susan declared she could no longer handle it and sent her mother back to Aunt Carol's prison. Back at Aunt Carol's, Grandma Eleanor's health declined rapidly. She was so weak that she would fall frequently. The houses were so close together that when she fell, her voice thin and reedy, she would cry out Clara's name, and Clara would hear her and run over to help her up. Aunt Carol had given Clara a key, but with a strict, cold warning: you can unlock the door to help her, but you lock it again the second you leave. In her final years, as Clara would help her back to her feet after a fall, her grandmother, her body frail but her grip surprisingly strong, would hold her hand tightly. Her eyes, clouded with age and sorrow, would fill with a desperate, terrifying loneliness, and she would whisper the same chilling words, a mantra of her despair, over and over again. "When I die, you have to come with me. Okay? Promise me." A ghost's invitation. 2 years later, Grandma Eleanor passed away. The funeral was held. Tears were shed, and life, on the surface, seemed to return to normal. But 1 month after her death, the true horror began. Clara had a dream, so vivid and terrifyingly real, it felt like a separate, parallel reality. In the dream, she was at Aunt Carol's house, playing with her cousins in the yard. She noticed a figure moving inside the bathroom and, without thinking, called out, "Who's in there?" The door opened, and standing there was Grandma Eleanor, looking as solid and real as she had in life, her face free from pain, "It's me, dear," she said with a warm, loving smile. "I've come to take you with me." Clara's subconscious mind screamed at her that this was wrong. Impossible. Her grandmother was dead. A wave of pure, primal terror washed over her, and she turned and ran, bolting for the front gate as fast as her legs could carry her. But as she ran, she felt her grandmother's icy, supernaturally strong hand grip her wrist. "It's just me, Clara." "Don't be afraid," Eleanor's voice said, eerily calm and reassuring, right beside her ear. "You don't understand. You were just hit by a truck. You're dead now. I am here to help you." Just as they reached the gate, Aunt Carol's car pulled into the driveway, tires screeching. Her face was a mask of sheer panic. In the dream, her aunt didn't seem to see Clara at all, even though she was standing right in front of her, struggling in her grandmother's grip. Aunt Carol fumbled with her keys, unlocked the gate, and started screaming her sister-in-law's name, Clara's mother. "You! Your daughter! Clara was hit by a truck. She's dead." Clara's dream self was reeling in a vortex of confusion and horror. Am I dead? Did a truck really hit me while she was lost in this horrified daze? Her grandmother's voice whispered behind her. "You see, I told you. You died in the accident. Now I can take you to see your grandpa." In the blink of an eye, Eleanor spun her around. The world dissolved and reformed, a nauseating blur of color and light. In less than a second, they were no longer on the street, but standing inside the old family home, the one where Clara had grown up with them. Her grandmother led her through the back door, moving with a strange, stealthy urgency. "Be very quiet," she whispered. "We don't want your grandfather to know you're here." But somehow, as they tiptoed through the familiar, yet strangely cold house, they ended up in the living room. Just then, Grandpa Arthur walked in through the front door, as if he were just returning from an errand. He hung his hat and jacket on a coat rack, and then saw Clara. His face, once so full of love for her, now filled with shock and a dawning fury. "Clara, what are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Grandma brought me," she replied innocently. She said, "I was hit by a truck and died, so she brought me here to see you." A look of pure, unadulterated rage crossed her grandfather's face. He strode over and delivered a sharp, stinging slap across her face, a spiritual shock that felt utterly, painfully real. "Who told you that nonsense?" he roared, before she could answer. He grabbed her hand and dragged her unceremoniously out the front door. Once outside, her grandfather called out into the grey, empty air, and two tall, imposing figures dressed entirely in black appeared out of nowhere, their forms seeming to coalesce from the shadows. Their faces were obscured, lost in a darkness deeper than night. "This child is still alive," Grandpa Arthur commanded them, his voice echoing with an otherworldly authority. "Take her back to where she belongs and guard this place. Do not let her be brought down here again." The two dark figures took her by the hands, their touch cold and impersonal, and as they led her away, the world faded to black. Clara jolted awake in her bed, her body trembling violently and drenched in a cold sweat, her pillow completely soaked through. The dream was so powerful, so real, that for weeks afterward, she was terrified to go near any main roads. Whenever she saw a large truck, she would pull over to the side of the road, her heart pounding with a fear she couldn't explain to anyone. the haunting continues. 2 weeks later, the dreams returned. This time, she was in a gloomy, desolate park. The sky was the color of lead, and the swings hung still and silent. In the center was a tall, metal tube slide, its surface covered in rust. At the very top stood Grandma Eleanor. "Clara, come up here," she called out, her voice echoing strangely in the dead air. "Come with me." Clara, compelled by the inexorable, nonsensical logic of the dream, climbed up the slide. When she reached the top, her grandmother looked at her with that same loving, yet terrifyingly determined, expression. "Now, jump," she said softly, her voice a gentle command. "Jump down from here so you can die. Then you can come with me forever." Remembering the last dream, the slap, the shadowy figures, Clara didn't hesitate. She scrambled away, fleeing down the slide and running as fast as she could across the dead grass, chanting her prayers in her mind. A frantic, silent plea for protection. She woke up screaming, her parents rushing into her room, their faces etched with concern, but assuming it was just a simple, childish nightmare. She tried to tell them, to make them understand, but they didn't believe in ghosts and dismissed her fears with gentle but firm disbelief. A month later, she had a third dream. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. It was bright and peaceful. She found herself outside a beautiful house she didn't recognize. On a stone bench under a trellis of blooming bougainvillea sat her grandparents, Arthur and Eleanor, together. She was still terrified after the last 2 encounters and hesitated at the white picket gate. Grandpa Arthur saw her and waved her in. "It's okay. Clara, come in," he called out, his voice kind and reassuring. "I won't let her try to take you anymore. Don't be afraid." As she cautiously approached, she could hear him sternly, but quietly, scolding his wife. Clara walked in and sat down with them, a fragile peace settling over her. But just as she did, she woke up. After that dream, Clara began to process what was happening. She realized her grandmother wasn't acting out of malice. She was acting out of a profound and twisted loneliness. In her final, miserable years, Clara had been her only source of gentle comfort, her only ray of light in a dark, cruel world. In death, her grandmother's spirit loved her so much that she couldn't bear to be apart from her. With this understanding, Clara found she couldn't be angry, only deeply, profoundly sad. For several years, the dreams of her grandparents stopped. Then, one night, her grandmother appeared again, but this time, her request was simple and mundane. "I am craving some chicken and dumplings," she said, her voice clear as day. "Please, ask your mother to make some for me." Clara, who was now away at college, called her mom the next day and relayed the strange, spectral message. Her mother, shaken but believing her daughter, cooked the meal and left it as an offering on the family altar. After that, Grandma Eleanor never appeared again, but Clara's connection to the spirit world remained, a door left permanently ajar. Now, whenever a relative passes away, they visit her in her dreams. A year ago, her maternal grandfather, Grandpa Thomas, passed away. One of his children, Clara's Aunt Maria, lived out of state and was unable to make it back in time to say goodbye. 3 days after the funeral, Clara had a dream. she saw her grandfather's body lying in his bed, prepared for burial in his finest suit. But sitting on the edge of the bed was his spirit, fully conscious and waiting. Clara, now strangely accustomed to these post-mortem visitations, felt brave enough to speak. "Grandpa, you've passed away," she said gently. "Why are you still here?" His spirit looked at her with sad, tired eyes. "I am waiting for your Aunt Maria," he replied. "I couldn't leave without seeing her one last time." As if on cue, the spirit of Aunt Maria appeared in the room, shimmering into existence. Her grandfather and his daughter embraced, weeping together in a silent, spiritual reunion of profound love and grief. After a moment, Grandpa Thomas looked at Clara and said, "Now, I am at peace. I can go." She watched, awe-struck, as his spirit calmly walked over to his physical body, lay down, and merged back into it, like a light being extinguished. And with that, Clara woke up, her body exhausted and soaked with sweat, as it always was after these intense, soul-bearing encounters. She never saw her Grandpa Thomas again. That concludes this incredibly moving and chilling chapter of Clara's life. The idea that a love can be so powerful that it transcends death, yet so lonely that it seeks to claim the one it holds dear, is truly haunting. And believe it or not, Clara's story is far from over. She has more experiences to share, including a terrifying series of events that took place in her college dormitory. I'll be sharing that story in our next episode. Thank you all so much for listening. Let me know what you thought of this story in the comments below. And until next time, take care